Man, I'm terrified what it's gonna dislodge. I've done shit everywhere that there is to eat. I guess it's time for me to get the fuck out of Dodge.
Sue Gray's report, it is being reported by Lewis Goodall of Newsnight, will be delivered today. All of the signs are that it's extremely bad news for the Prime Minister, something that we probably should have worked out a little bit more clearly yesterday, given the fact that it prompted Dame Cressida Dick to announce a proper police investigation into these countless parties that were unfolding at Downing Street, while you had to attend funerals over Zoom. At 11 o'clock, we'll be joined by Bill Browder, who is probably the nation's greatest expert on the role that sanctions could play, and indeed should play, in persuading, shall we say, Vladimir Putin to dial down the potential aggression towards Ukraine. Knitting those two stories together, he's also a bit of an expert on the question of just how far into British high society, and perhaps even the Conservative Party, Russian money of questionable provenance has infiltrated. That, to me, is a fascinating combination of the two big stories facing us domestically and internationally at the moment. And to tie them together still further, could a man taken by surprise by a cake really be the best qualified politician to take on Vladimir Putin? Confounded by a cake, but poised apparently to persuade Vladimir Putin to dial down his military ambitions. Not only that, but this is a man, of course, who was reportedly prepared to let the bodies pile high in Britain with regard to the coronavirus, but is, after yesterday's appearance in the House of Commons, apparently motivated by deep and profound concern for the good people of Ukraine. If you're prepared to let a virus rip through your own population, God knows what you're prepared to let Vladimir Putin do to another. But nothing if not opportunistic, of course. This attempt by Boris Johnson to cast himself as some sort of hero of the hour is ploddingly predictable, as is Jacob Rees-Mogg's continuing. I mean, it's quite bizarre, isn't it? That old line about what is it they say? Don't interrupt your enemies while they're making mistakes. I think in Jacob Rees-Mogg's case, if he had any friends, they'd stage an intervention, wouldn't they? Now, not only yesterday did he claim that the Prime Minister had got all the major decisions right, but he then went on later in the day to claim that we now have a presidential system in this country. So if the Prime Minister is compelled to resign, then there should be a general election immediately, demonstrating an astonishingly, characteristically astonishing ignorance of basic history. I can think off the top of my head of 3 precedents for Prime Ministers changing at a time of national crisis, which Jacob Rees-Mogg, despite his very expensive education, seems crushingly unaware of. Churchill replaced Chamberlain the day that Hitler invaded Western Europe. Lloyd George replaced Asquith. That's a few weeks after the Somme and about 3 months before the Russian Revolution. And, of course, Palmerston replaced Aberdeen at one of the lowest points, if not the lowest point of the Crimean War, about 3 months after the charge of the Light Brigade. So even his sort of cosplaying Edwardian intellectual act is as fraudulent as every other fibre of his ridiculous being. Unlawful advice given to the Queen, and then yesterday claiming that we're no longer really a monarchy, but we have a presidential system. In the Queen's Platinum Jubilee year, for Jacob Rees-Mogg to insult Her Majesty in that way by individually and completely erroneously trying to rewrite the nature of our unwritten constitution is, even by his standards, an act of such crashing arrogance and ignorance that if a medal were available for such misconduct, he would have a drawful. But where do we begin this morning? We begin with a slightly odd question, because I have struggled a little lately with the mystery of how to have a conversation about more or less the same material in refreshing and different ways. I think we've done all right. I'll allow myself a little pat on the back. I think we've managed to hit our marks most mornings, finding new angles and new ways into what will probably prove to be one of the biggest political stories of our lifetimes. And I want to go completely off piece today. I want to come at it from a completely different angle, and in a way, it's a combination of both of those men, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson, that prompts the question. Boris Johnson's legion misconduct and Jacob Rees-Mogg's crashing arrogance and ignorance combined to create this morning's question. What's the worst thing he's done? What is the worst thing Boris Johnson has done for you? Going back over, should we start with since he became Prime Minister? Or do you want to go back to when he was born? I don't think that would be reasonable. But we could certainly go back to when he came into the public eye, when you first knew about him. Let's leave the school report out of it. Let's concentrate on what's the worst thing he's done. Because there's isn't that amazing tale, isn't there, about how Al Capone presided over one of the most bloody crime families in the history of, the world, I suppose. And yet, finally, when they got him, it was for tax offences. It was for tax evasion. A clever investigation to look at every aspect of his organisation and find something, because they were never going to be able to pin a murder on him. They were never going to be able to break the mafia code. But, of course, with forensic accountants, as we would call them these days, they were able to establish fiscal misconduct. So a man reportedly responsible for hundreds, if not thousands, of deaths and sundry other serious crimes and misdemeanours was actually caught in the end by accountants. He was caught by his tax affairs. If Boris Johnson goes for having a party during lockdown, or having several parties during lockdown, and or lying about them, it would be in many ways remarkable. And although it's a slightly lazy leap, and Richard points out that Thatcher was replaced by John Major in the build-up to the First Gulf War, so Jacob Rees-Mogg's ignorance extends even to living memory, never mind the era that he sometimes pretends to live in. And the question of what Boris Johnson would need to do to get handed his sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap is one that we've often asked on this programme. And in fact, not long ago, we stopped asking it. It had become clear that he was the sort of politician possessed of the requisite materials to shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, as Donald Trump famously explained, and not lose a single vote. You can see it a little bit now, although, frankly, I've got to tell you, it's crumbling. Only the Mail, the Dean Dorries, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Conor Burns remain. The Mail, I mean, God, considering how many years the Mail had its finger on the pulse of Middle England, or at least on the bile duct, had its finger on the bile ducts of Middle England, to be getting this so catastrophically wrong is, for students of newspaper editors or editorships, it is absolutely incredible. Johnson faces police interview over parties is the front page of Rupert Murdoch's Times. Hello, 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 Bojo is the front page of Rupert Murdoch's Sun. But Lord Rothermere's Daily Mail goes with a nation that's lost all sense of proportion, mounting an attack there on the rule of law and suggesting that the people who wrote the rules that prevented you from attending funerals, celebrating birthdays, saying goodbye to loved ones, the people who wrote those rules, riding roughshod over them on an almost daily basis, is not something you should be getting your little head in a bother about. You shouldn't be getting your little knickers in a twist about that, you plebs. It's Boris Johnson. He can jolly well do what he wants. Now get a proper sense of proportion, please. Doff cap, tug forelock, and look the other way. So the question that I have decided to ask you is one to which I genuinely don't know the answer, because I think, sincerely, that we could fill an hour, and probably more, with utterly plausible responses, with answers that are both personal and political. There will be reasons why you have been particularly bothered by an event from his past. There'll be reasons why something he has done in the past upsets you more than it upsets other people. It may be something to do with his moral code as opposed to his professional performance. It may be linked to Brexit. It may be linked to Darius Guppy. It may be linked to the myriad failures over which he's presided in the context of the coronavirus. That the worst thing that Boris Johnson has ever done, go back to being London mayor, possibly even pulling him up on some of his journalism, the Islamophobia that he was sharing in The Spectator not that long ago, Andrew Neil's Spectator. I genuinely want to know. So take a moment. I'm not going to take any calls until after the 10:15 pause. Or inhalation, we should call it. Keith says I shouldn't call it a break. So I'm going to call it an inhalation. The 10:15 inhalation, can we call it an inhalation? Or cake time at 10:15. We'll have some cake at 10:15, shall we? The point being that I want to know why that would be what you would choose. I am still pretty big on the unlawful prorogation of Parliament. I don't know why I'm so hung up on that. I think it's because I spent so long desperately trying to give a break to people who voted for Brexit and claimed it had nothing to do with xenophobia and that they knew what they were doing and their eyes were wide open. And eventually, after the fishing had gone and the farming had gone, eventually all they were left with, and I say this with still a modicum of affection and warmth, all you were left with was this slightly desperate sigh of sovereignty. So I thought, okay, well, they obviously take these institutions very seriously, or not obviously. They are claiming that sovereignty is very important to them, that they have a sort of emotional relationship with our parliament and with our unwritten constitution. These are people who do feel reverence towards Her Majesty the Queen. These are people who, because I didn't want to believe that everybody was either thick or racist or both, that voted for that referendum back in 2016. I don't believe that. I think appallingly misinformed, misled, misdirected is a huge part of the problem. But the ones who were still shouting about it, the ones who weren't prepared to at least sort of sit down and be quiet for a while, ended up claiming it was all about sovereignty. And I wanted to give them a break. I really wanted to believe that there was some sort of, I didn't feel it myself necessarily, but I wanted to respect the sincerity of people who claimed that they really cared about that kind of thing. So when he sent Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is in a way the poster boy for the kind of bogus patriotism that I'm describing, when he sent Jacob Rees-Mogg to give the Queen unlawful advice about the prorogation of Parliament, that for me was huge. Didn't land with a lot of people in the way that it should have done, because the claim was made, oh no, we have to do this to, quotes, get Brexit done. But it blew away for me the last vestige of hope that there was some honesty involved in that whole project. It blew away for me the last scintilla of possibility that there was some sincerity involved in the idea that you knew what you were voting for. Because if you voted for the primacy of our parliament, the idea that it could be unlawfully prorogued after sending Jacob Rees-Mogg to mislead the Queen, to me was huge. But I'm a bit weird. And obviously, like everyone else in this country, my brain had been a little bit boiled by the whole Brexit debate. I still think, though, that was massive. I think it was historical in its awfulness. Historic and historical, actually. It is something that in the annals of our island's history will assume a very special place. Sending, was he Leader of the House of Commons at the time? I think he probably was. Sending Jacob Rees-Mogg to mislead the Queen about the unlawful prorogation of our Parliament. Didn't touch the sides of the rest of the country. It was a very lonely furrow to plough. But I mention it here to show you how wide open the parameters are for your contribution to this programme, for your answer to this question. What, for you, is the worst thing that Boris Johnson has ever done? And if he does go for this, and it is far from certain, although the clarity everybody craves will, I think, coalesce over the next couple of days. If he does go for this, it will stand comparison, perhaps, with Al Capone being done in the end for tax evasion. It's a loose analogy, of course, although Andrew Rosindale, the MP for Romford, has just told Sky News, well, he didn't rob a bank. That is now what Tory MPs are offering up in defence of Boris Johnson. Well, he didn't rob a bank. Is he fit to be Prime Minister? Well, he hasn't robbed any banks. I could almost keep a list of how desperate these excuses are sounding. He was ambushed by a cake, he didn't rob a bank, and pretty much anything that Nadine Dorries has ever said would all be contenders for the daftest contribution to this particular public discourse. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. What's the worst thing he's ever done for you? Nick's in Wimborne. Nick, take it away.
Hello, James.
Hello,
well, where do you start? Just on that robbing the bank thing, do you mind if I just point out that the 17-mile tailbacks that we've got down in Dover on a regular basis, that the cost for that by the HMRC estimate at £13 billion a year in administration charges, or £250 million a week. They didn't write that on a bus, did they?
No, they didn't, and we must all hope that the situation doesn't stay indefinitely in place, although you've reminded me. I thought I'd done quite a good opening to the show today with a little little menu of what's ahead, like a proper grown-up presenter. I forgot John Shirley, who is, of course, a Dover import-export agent to whom we've spoken a lot over the last few years. He'll be joining me at 12:45 to give us the latest on the situation that you've just referenced there, Nick. But back to Boris Johnson.
Yeah, well, the fact that in the Telegraph he wrote his articles for 10 years, basically grooming people to the, giving ignorance about the EU, lying about the EU. He used to say himself, he used to put his article in, he could hear the greenhouses being smashed back in England,
He'd lob a brick over the wall and sit back and enjoy the sound of smashing glass on the other side.
Indeed. So the misinformation about the EU, from bent bananas to condoms and endless lists of very funny things.
Yes.
But effectively, those articles changed what was a few headbangers like Redwood and a few others who were making a political career out of pulling us out of the most successful trading bloc in the world, all right? Yeah? All of that for 10 years. And then what happens? He's put in charge of the implementation of it.
Incredible.
How could that happen? A journalist put in charge of our agreement with the EU, which has left us, signed the agreement, and a year later, threatening articles.
You're only allowed one. So you're going for the Telegraph journalism, his tenure as Brussels correspondent for the Daily Telegraph, during which time he probably did more than anybody else in the history of these islands to completely misrepresent the nature of membership and our relationship with the European Union.
James,
yes?
Can I just say one thing? How about the fact that us 48% Remainers have no political representation? That's what I'm truly upset about. That is the thing that makes me effervescent with rage.
And well, I feel your pain. I mean, at least you have representation in some corners of the Fourth Estate, if not Parliament, at this point in time, and that is something we will no doubt turn our attention to in the not too distant future. But for now, it is the question of what is the worst thing he's done, and that clearly is a brilliant contribution because from Nick, because it underpins so much of what has followed. The reason why your nan thinks that Brussels is... look, think of every caller I took during that period when things started going a bit bonkers on the show. Every single caller who believed something stupid, whether it was that they were about to abolish 3-pin plugs, or that she'd be able to wrap her fish and chips in newspaper again, or that poor woman in Lowestoft who was supposed to be in charge of the fish market, all the stuff that she believed, even though she was actually working at the fish face. I mean, I lose track of all the things that were believed by people, and that's just my callers. Then you've got all the other stuff that was published in places like the Daily Express and Rupert Murdoch's Sun. There's stories about bent bananas and health and safety legislation. You can't. All of that, I think, became a genre of journalism that Boris Johnson invented. So we'll do that. Inventing the Brexit Lies genre of journalism. That's on the list. Stephen's in Leeds. Stephen, what's the worst thing he's ever done?
I can't believe you're asking just for one.
Well, I know it's not fair, but we've only got an hour. I want to talk about Ukraine for at least part of the second hour of the programme. So sorry, you're only allowed one.
£350 million on the bus.
Yeah.
National insurance tax hike to pay for the NHS, to pay for the backlog of the pandemic.
Yeah.
£350 on the bus. National insurance hike.
You're combining the two by saying, why do we need a national insurance hike if we've got 350 million quid a week like you promised?
I am that frustrates me, but yeah. I'm going to kind of break the rules a little bit. The thing that really frustrates me is the fact that I voted for Brexit because of the lies that I was peddled. And
yeah.
if I could turn back the clock and untick that box, I am so distraught with myself for being, especially after listening to commentators like yourself and others.
Yes.
Especially after being duped in such a fantastically horrendous, Boris way.
Yes.
I'm amazed. I'm amazed at myself that I fell for it. I am absolutely fuming with the fact that I voted for Brexit, because I, like millions of other people, would absolutely turn back the clock, because everything that's been said, everything that's been promised, everything that's been forecast has basically, apart from the negative, has not come to fruition.
Well, I don't think you should be so hard on yourself, because I've got half a dozen people in my inbox still who haven't seen the light. So you should give yourself a break, shouldn't you? And also, it might now look in retrospect like some easily avoidable pratfall, but the effort that was put into leading you into it was immense, mate. They've never spent that kind of money on anything over the years. The think tanks, the newspapers, the magazines, the politicians, absolutely epic effort put into it.
To what end?
Well, there's the great mystery of our time. There's the great mystery of our time, Stephen. To what end? I still don't know what they think they want.
Well, I'll tell you what. I don't know. I don't know what anybody in that government is capable of, because they've perfectly shown over the last 2-3 years exactly what they're incapable of.
Well, that's very true. The lie on the side of the bus, which comes into very stark relief when you remember the necessity of this national insurance hike, although if he stays in the post, then populism and history suggests he'll probably abandon that for short-term political advantage and to assuage his own slightly querulous backbenchers. But that combination. I mean, to be fair, Boris Johnson might have driven the bus, metaphorically speaking. The lie was Dominic Cummings' work. Very keen not to let him rehabilitate himself in the public for the time being. But yeah, the bus, the NHS and the money, that's pretty huge, isn't it? Or the Telegraph journalists. I mean, you pick and choose. Like Stephen said, it's a bit cruel of me to do one. It's a bit like when there's a run on something at Christmas. You're only allowed one Tracy Island. I'm showing my age. You're only allowed one Pokemon. That doesn't really work. What was a big toy this Christmas? Anybody? Beulah? Anyone? What was the big type? You're only allowed to buy one. If there's a massive run on something and the shops say, we're rationing PlayStation 5s, thank you. You're only allowed one. So you're only allowed to do one because demand is so high. Sarah's in Liverpool. What's the worst thing he's ever done?
Oh, James,
hello,
lovely
Sarah.
to speak to you.
Likewise.
Thank you. It's just absolute hypocrisy constantly. The free school meal situation, when he was so willing to take those meals from the poorest and neediest people in society.
Yeah.
And the £20 universal credit cut.
Hey, you're only allowed one.
I could reel off a million.
Well, we all could, but you're only allowed one. The one that really grinds your gears the most.
Well, let's lump them two together. And when Marcus Rashford pushed that through, and it was such a big, a huge win for the country, and a huge win where everyone felt like they came together and really fought against it. He then jumps on the bandwagon and applauses along with it because it was put back on the map again.
It's incredible.
You don't know who he is, and you don't know what he stands for. And the fact that he's willing to flip-flop his way constantly.
How interesting, yes. So it's not just the egregious attempt to remove that money from the most...
Love that word. Love it.
I do too. You may have noticed. It's not just the egregious attempt to take that money from the poorest families in the country. It's what his subsequent flip-flopping showed you about him. Because I know she's not looked on fondly by many portions of the population, not least in the city from which you have rung. But with Margaret Thatcher... I mean, I know. So wait, that she all of it, but she stuck to her guns. She would, even if it was desperately unpopular. She was prepared to let hunger strikers die. She was prepared to let the coal mining industry wither on the vine. You may have disagreed with her furiously, and respect isn't quite the right word I'm looking for. But you knew that she would have the courage of her convictions, however repellent you found those convictions to be. But Johnson doesn't even have that.
She could make your skin crawl, but you knew what she stood for. You knew what she stood for, and you knew she was going to see it through to the bitter end.
And what does he stand for? What does he stand for? Stands for him and nothing else. Absolutely nothing else. Wow, what a hat trick. We barely scratched the sides. Thank you, Sarah. We'll talk again, I hope. I just think we should reflect upon what the people who defend Boris Johnson, members of his parliamentary party, have to say in his defence, as we, together as a nation, reflect upon the idea that if Vladimir Putin does start rattling his sabres or even deploying them with regard to Ukraine, Boris Johnson will be in charge of this country. Here's one of his cheerleaders.
He, as far as I can see, he was, in a sense, ambushed with a cake.
That's Connor Burns. Michael's in Muswell Hill. Michael, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
Well, it's a sort of tough call, really. There are so many choices.
I don't think there's going to be a winner. I think we can probably all agree on that. But you never know. Someone might drop something that makes us all go, oh, my God, you're right. That's absolutely head and shoulders.
Absolutely. And clearly, COVID and the incompetence has had the deepest impact on many people. But if we said that's down to incompetence and not deliberate,
yes,
then for me, if it's about deliberate acts, for me, the fact he allowed Dominic Cummings to sit in the Rose Garden, look at the British electorate and lie openly to our faces. And he knew he was lying, we knew he was lying, and Boris Johnson, as our Prime Minister, didn't care about it. And I think he degraded the standing of the political class really quite significantly in doing that.
It was an incredible moment, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we all know politicians.
It was an incredible moment.
Yeah, it was an incredible insult.
Yeah, and now we know why. Because I can't imagine. I don't know what unfolded, but the idea that Dominic Cummings was going to walk the plank when he was aware of all of the rule breaking that had been going on in Downing Street itself suddenly makes a lot more sense than it did at the time. You know, the thought that he must have something on Boris Johnson was probably 52% he must have something on Boris Johnson, and 48% he's such an evil genius that Johnson needs him by his side. Well, we know the second bit wasn't true, so he had something on Boris Johnson, and he probably said, if you don't protect me on this one, I'll blow the lid off all the parties, or whatever it may be, or the decoration. That time you tried to set up a secret fund so that a rich Tory donor could pay for your wallpaper.
No, I agree, James. But you know, he was clearly in a corner and cared more about his survival than the impact of his decisions. And that's always been.
Deserves a place on the list. It absolutely deserves a place on the list. Allowing Dominic Cummings to trash the truth in public, in the Rose Garden, in the heart of government, and then, of course, prompting his entire government to go along with it, culminating, for me, in a remarkable moment involving a man who's keeping a very, very low profile at the moment, Michael Gove, flirting on this radio station, flirting with the idea of claiming that he too often went for drives to test his eyesight, and realising, just as the words began to emerge from his mouth, that this was a bridge he wasn't prepared to cross on Boris Johnson's behalf, and they all thought it was so funny. Will's in Leeds. Will, what's the worst thing he's done?
Hi, James. So the one I was going to suggest is actually from prior to the pandemic.
Yes.
And I was double-checking just before I called in.
Good.
It was towards the end of 2019.
Yes.
There was I think it was a PMQs where basically somebody raised the fact that Boris Johnson was using a lot of inflammatory language about, opposition MPs being traitors,
yes,
and, inflammatory language. And, the issue of Joe Cox's murder was obviously brought up. And his response was, I think the best way to honour the death of Joe Cox is to get Brexit done.
God, you're right, aren't you? I think I would have needed to double check that as well. But it's not even. There's not even any political gain from that. Which, I mean, obviously is a very cold way of looking at it. But sure.
it's just inhuman. To so flippantly treat such a
because it had become the reflex response to any criticism or any problem, hadn't it? And we know this because it fell apart only at Owen Paterson, which hasn't come up on the list yet. But it only fell apart up until Owen Paterson saying we need to get Brexit done was a response to absolutely every criticism. But even I hadn't clocked just how low he went with that tactic. And you're right, he did say that the best way to honour her memory would be to get Brexit done. Well, I'm 99% sure he did, and I'm trusting you because you say you've checked. Whoa. Do you know, you might have confounded my theory that we wouldn't get. I mean, I don't want to use the word winner in this context because it would sound crass, wouldn't it? But the worst, there may be one that does feel worse than all the others, because that just ties together so many different elements of Johnson and his political project and his personality and the tragedy of Joe Cox's assassination. Shortly after, of course, Nigel Farage unveiled that racist poster with all the Nazi echoes. 10:39 is the time. Will, thank you. Claiming that getting Brexit done would honour Joe Cox's memory, allowing Dominic Cummings to stand in the garden outside the seat of our government, if you like, and lie through his teeth about breaking rules the rest of us were required to follow. That's assumed a very new resonance subsequently, hasn't it? Denying or seeking to take food away from the poorest families in the country, food away from the children of the poorest families in the country, and then pressing ahead, of course, with the removal of that 20 quid uplift on universal credit. many recipients of which are in full-time employment. But then for our caller in Liverpool, it was the reversal. It was the absence of any convictions. That might be about to change, literally, but the absence of any convictions on Johnson's part, that when Marcus Rashford got involved, he flipped again. And I still think that informed anger about that humiliation for Boris Johnson, informed some of the disgusting comments made about Marcus Rashford and his colleagues taking the knee in protest against racism by not just people, not just members of the general public or the media, but by politicians in Boris Johnson's cabinet, up to and including the Home Secretary Priti Patel. The bus, the lie. Quick note here from contains some criticism of me, which I think is always good to reflect upon occasionally. Read what it actually said on the bus. It was very clever, but you make yourself look stupid every time you bring it up. It did not say we will give £350 million to the NHS. It said we should support the NHS. I agree with most things you say, and although I voted for Brexit, I have changed my mind now, as you suggested I might, but please read exactly what it said on the side of the bus and stop leaving yourself open to ridicule. You're being very literal. I mean, literally, you're correct. It said we give £350 million to or we send £350 million a week to the EU. Why don't we spend it on the NHS instead? Or words to that effect. So, I mean, technically you're correct, but the rhetoric, I'm afraid I disagree with you, was clearly designed to create in the minds of people who saw it the idea that we take 350 million quid back and stick it all in the NHS. It was very, very, very deliberately designed to provide and to provoke precisely the response that my callers have been reflecting and describing pretty much ever since it appeared. So you are technically correct, but rhetorically wrong, although I take on board your admission of regret for your vote, which I think takes some guts. I really do. 10:42 is the time. Francis is in Belfast. What's the worst thing for you, Francis?
Well, for me, James, it's the fact that Boris was at death's door less than 2 years ago, and he's had no redemption from that. He hasn't changed his ways. And you'd think if someone has been at that point in their life where they've been very ill, they might reflect on how they run things and how they've managed their lives, and particularly a politician. They might reflect on what they've done wrong and maybe try and have better policies in future, and he hasn't done that.
It's an absence rather than an act. It's an absence of action rather than an actual action, isn't it? But it's powerful, the idea that people saved him, and
absolutely.
Prior to that, he'd been downplaying. Go on.
Sure. And he's gone ahead and had parties when other people have been in the same situation as himself, and families haven't been able to see their loved ones.
Yeah.
And he hasn't reflected on that.
I mean, it's a subtler contribution to the conversation than the other ones, isn't it? But you're right, because it speaks to the soul of the man, if that's the right word to use, or indeed perhaps the vacuum where the soul should be, even staring into the abyss and being helped out of it by NHS staff appears not to have given him a moment's pause about his attitude to humanity, his attitude to other human beings and to the safety of the population he was supposedly elected to protect.
Exactly, yeah.
It's true. Thank you, Francis. That's very much on the list. The absence of redemption or even reflection after falling so ill himself. It is coming up to 10:44. 03456060973 is the number you need. This is nice from Edward. Edward says, James O'Brien, you talk nothing but garbage. Why Global keep you broadcasting your rubbish is shameful. Edward, give me a ring, mate, and tell me which of these things aren't true, okay? He invented the genre of journalism that told lies about the European Union. He presided over the Vote Leave campaign that stuck on the side of the bus the very deliberate idea that we would save £350 million a week by leaving the European Union and then give it to the NHS. He presided over the decision to remove or not to give free school meals to the poorest children in the country during school holidays, during the lockdown, and only changed his mind after Marcus Rashford intervened. He allowed Dominic Cummings to stand in the garden at 10 Downing Street and lie about having undertaken a 60-mile round trip to a beauty spot on his wife's birthday in order to test his eyesight. He said in the House of Commons that the best way to honour the memory of the assassinated MP, assassinated by Edward, a white supremacist terrorist, would be to get Brexit done, and he failed to demonstrate any new concern for other human beings after being so perilously ill with coronavirus himself. We'll free up a phone line for you. Pick any one. Tell me why it's not true, pal. 03456060973. And failing that, ask yourself this. How did he manage to turn you into someone like that, presented with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inalienable truths, 6 incontrovertible facts, 6 episodes in a political career that contains countless more examples of egregious awfulness, and yet here you are, tugging your little forelock, doffing your little cap, and claiming that it's garbage. How did he do that to you? What do you get in return, Edward? What's the payoff? What's the crack? What do you get in return? Because you gave him power. Look what he's done with it. What did he give you? This is incredible. I have to tell you, it's like a tsunami in the studio, and I think you'll allow me to say I thought I was good at this, remembering and chronicling the various misdemeanours of Boris Johnson. But my goodness me, we're 50 minutes in and we have barely touched the sides. There's a couple that I've jotted down that have come in via text, and I'll wait to see whether they come in on the calls. If they don't, actually no, I'll do this one now. This is from Jeff. He goes, saying when Foreign Secretary that Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was simply teaching journalism and so undermining her entire case, which of course hinged on the fact that she was on holiday. He was Foreign Secretary and he made Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's plight worse than it already was. And that, you're absolutely right, Jeff, and everybody else who's picked up on that. Where do you even begin? Where do you even begin? And there are so many other things that I'd forgotten. I just checked on the Joe Cox thing. As I said, I was 99% certain it was being recalled correctly. In many ways, it's even worse than the conversation we just had. I'll read you a report from that week. In September of 2019, Boris Johnson has declined to apologise for his language about Joe Cox and ducked a Commons debate on inflammatory rhetoric, instead attending a meeting of Tory MPs to say he will continue to use the phrase surrender bill to refer to the act passed to avoid a no-deal Brexit. Johnson spoke at a meeting of the 1922 Committee of Conservative MPs the morning after being branded a disgrace for dismissing concerns about his inflammatory language in light of Cox's murder by a far-right extremist. In the Commons on Wednesday, he told one MP that her concerns about aggressive language fueling violence were humbug, and another that the best way to honour Cox was to get Brexit done. Brexit, of course, being something that Joe Cox and her family, her entire family, including her children, had campaigned against quite passionately. So, my God, that's on the list as well, as is Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. And we haven't even touched yet on his personal life, which you are more than welcome to include, although some of it, I think, remains protected by the courts. 10:51 is the time. Lizzie is in Limehouse. Lizzie, what would you like to suggest?
I mean, having just listened to that list, I don't actually think mine is that most important of things that he did wrong.
Fair enough.
But for me, it really encapsulates who he is. So when they were bringing the third runway into Heathrow, he promised his constituents in Uxbridge that he would lie down in front of the bulldozers. And, you know, he took a thing that was so important to the people that he was representing. The people of that part of London really care about this issue. Very, very
yes,
big deal.
Of course.
And, you know, when it came for him to stand up, to do the right thing, to honour his word, to do what he promised the people who put him in power that he would actually do, he skulked off and hid in Afghanistan, as far as I can remember.
He miraculously, an appointment in the Middle East needed to be kept on precisely the day that he could have cast the vote he'd promised the people of Uxbridge he would cast, or indeed he could have lain down in front of the bulldozer as he promised the people of Uxbridge he would
so
do.
He's you know, I've been an avid follower of his career since he first became Mayor of London, and, you know, diametrically opposed to him. I have no love lost for him.
Of course.
And what he did during the COVID pandemic. But for me, somehow that one little incident, running away, betraying the trust of people.
It was on the day of the vote, wasn't it? I think.
It was on the day of the vote that he went. And also it was something that I think maybe the whole country didn't care about, although obviously we should because of environmental issues. But people, you know, the people who really cared about it believed in him so passionately, and he just threw that away.
Yeah, I think you're right to put it on the list. I should stress that these don't have to be contenders for the most egregious of all his behaviours. They can simply be things we need to be reminded of. And you know, for any other politician, a lie of that magnitude to the issue so crucial to the constituency would have hung around his neck like a millstone forevermore, wouldn't it? But not him.
And I think that's the thing, you know, winning the trust of people by identifying what they passionately care about, what's deeply important to their day-to-day life, you know, be that the NHS with the Brexit bus, you know, in my case with COVID and losing my mum in the pandemic, all these things. He identifies it, he says exactly what they want to say, and then at the moment of delivery, he's gone.
He's like McCavity, the mystery cat. He's not there. You're absolutely right, Lizzie. Thanks for that one. It's there, and it deserves to be. 10:54 is the time. From Lizzie to Anna. Anna's in Camden. What would you like to say, Anna?
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks, James.
You're very welcome.
Good to be on.
It is.
I grew up in the 70s, and I remember watching the news, you know, Mum and Dad watching the news and me hearing day after day after day about all the troubles in Northern Ireland. Now, I've got no personal, kind of connection with Northern Ireland,
yes,
and I've never actually been there. But I remember really vividly, you know, the stories of the murders and the punishment. Actually, I find it quite upsetting, thinking about it. The punishment, beatings and all that type of stuff. To play fast and loose with the Northern Ireland peace process is absolutely, I mean, it's just abhorrent to me.
Yeah.
I can't believe that anybody in their right mind could support that. Those poor people in Northern Ireland. And, you know, it's my understanding that when we left a single market, I personally, I can't see how you can square that kind of circle of having no border on the island of Ireland or in the Irish Sea.
Well, you have regulatory alignment on two sides of an invisible border. You can't.
So it's putting that whole...
I mean, it's funny. I don't know whether they understood it or whether they actually believed. By then they were so blinded by belief that they somehow thought that a solution would present itself. They used to be even dismissive of it. Oh, there'll be technological solutions, or we'll come up with something, it's possibly doable. And the rest of us understood that the rules under which Ireland lives and the rules under which Northern Ireland lives have to be the same for the Good Friday Agreement to hold. They just have to be. You can't have different regulatory regimes on the same island unless you've got checks of what's passing from one bit to the other. So it either stays under single market rules or you have a border on the island of Ireland. And if you're not going to have a border on the island of Ireland, there has to be a border in the Irish Sea. And as you speak, Anna, the executive editor of the Belfast Telegraph, John Laverty, messages me to say, for me and many others in Northern Ireland, this picture of Boris Johnson with the DUP First Minister Arlene Foster and Deputy Leader Nigel Dodds shortly after he'd gone to Belfast and was treated like the second coming following his bullish promise that there'd be no border in the Irish Sea. And it's a picture of Johnson flanked by the two politicians John mentions, and they both look like cats that have just got the proverbial cream. And he goes on, shortly afterwards there was a border in the Irish Sea. Foster was ousted by her own party and quit politics. Dodds lost his Westminster seat to an abstentionist Sinn Féin challenger, and now the DUP are threatening to bring down the devolved government because of the outworkings of the hard Brexit they campaigned for on the back of the soon-to-be PM's rhetoric. So there it is in from the other side of the Irish Sea in glorious Technicolor.
It's just, I mean, it's unfathomable to me.
And you're only ninth on the list this morning. That's the ninth thing that we've come up with. And unfathomable still applies to the kind of character that would even contemplate undertaking such an epic untruth. But we're talking Boris Johnson, and we are talking specifically what you think the worst thing, or what you would add to the list of the worst things Boris Johnson has done. We're not necessarily ranking them. Thank you, Anna. Susan is in Fife. Susan, what would you like to add to the list?
I'm actually back at my job in Rome, but nevertheless, I was Erasmus. Erasmus is the thing that really got under my skin. It cut the knees off underneath a whole generation, maybe two, of students who will now not get the chance to come and
to study in other European countries. Yes.
Yeah, they will not get the chance. We used to offer lots of places at my university. We used to offer them to students, give them bursaries, everything else.
That come from humbler backgrounds than the kind of kids who can afford.
We almost deliberately chose the lower brackets,
yes.
so to speak, because they need that experience of a broader network. Life hasn't got to all be grey and, Backstreet's Britain.
Yeah.
But
and they didn't need to do it. They didn't need to do it. It was reckless. It was vandalism.
To me, it was. It's the one thing that really, and I know I'm coming from a very personal point of view.
Good. No, you must. I want people to do that. You saw it. Your face is up against the screen on this one, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And you know what it's done to people. It's robbed young people of parts of their potential futures.
Yeah, but I had to send students home in the middle of a course.
No, I did not know that.
Available.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we had to send students home in the middle of a course because the funding wasn't there anymore. It was horrendous, and it still is, because I cannot get round the thing. As I say, he's just cut off. He's marooned generations of young people who we could have helped and spread around Europe.
He, of course, went to an international school in Brussels for a while, I think, when he was young.
Yes, so he got the benefit. But I had to send students home in the middle.
Well, that is a beautiful illustration, for want of a better adjective, of how much has crept under the radar for the rest of us. Because the idea of having that rug pulled from under you mid-course, that's just cruel and unnecessary. It would have been, I think, perfectly easy to keep Erasmus while not being in the European Union anymore. It's a reciprocal arrangement to the benefit of all participants. They've replaced it with a shoddy patch-up job that many people, I don't know whether Susan would agree. Can we adjust the record to show that Susan is back in Rome, please? I always like my cosmopolitan callers. Will actually prejudice against poorer pupils. So the middle class, the wealthier students will probably still be able to study abroad, but poorer students won't be. We're up to 10 examples now of Boris Johnson's behaviour, things that, regardless of whether he is, and it's not certain by any stretch of the imagination, but he is currently more vulnerable than he's ever been in his political career. If he is done for by the parties and the lies about the parties and the breaking of the laws that he made regarding parties, it will have a little touch of Al Capone being done for tax evasion, because the list of things about which you cared more, or about which you cared enormously, is long and growing. And I'd be grateful to continue contributing to it now. So what do you think deserves to be on the list of the worst things Boris Johnson has ever done? 22 minutes after 11 is the time. And hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. There's a couple of phone lines free because, of course, with that interview with Bill, it just took our foot off the gas on the Boris Johnson conversation. So we return to that now. And we head to Wolverhampton first. Ro is there. Ro, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
Thank you very much for the show. I think the mother of all, or the worst of all for me, is his ability to systematically tarnish the integrity of our political and democratic institutions. At the time when democracy has never been at a greater peril. And, he's played a big part in that. And that legacy will leave a long time before, after he's gone. It will take decades for us to repair. And that is, the most or the worst of it all, because, the reason that President Putin and Xi are it has been an onslaught of liberal democratic order is because they know they've got useful idiots in the Western world who will do their bidding in doing their job for them and discrediting liberal democracy and its institutions.
What would you point to as the best examples of the broad behaviour that you describe?
I think his whole character, the campaign that he ran during the Brexit, the campaign that and the discourse he created in order to gain what he wanted. He was willing to destroy the entire political institutions of this country in order to achieve the aim the end that he wanted. I mean, I came to the UK as a refugee. I bear the torch mark of the Taliban on me. I've got friends and relatives there.
Gosh.
And, I lived in Pakistan. I lived in Iran. I do know, what it means to live under a democracy, and I know what it means to live under tyranny.
Yes.
And, we have to, our economy will grow, leaders will change, we will be able to, restructure or, refund the NHS the way we want to. But what will take a long time to come and get repaired is the
intangibles, the intangibles,
yes,
rather than the tangibles. I hope I'm not being inappropriate, but if somebody said to you, prove it, I've got answers to this question, and I know you have as well. But in the context of my list, you're being too broad. So an example of him riding roughshod over the institutions, of breaking that trust, would be helpful just for the purposes of this morning's programme.
I think not taking responsibility for anything.
You're doing it again. I think, it's hard to pin down specifics when you're talking about someone. Yes.
You have to look at it in a holistic way, because you take your eyes off and look to Britain from outside as I can.
Yes.
Because I came from a part of the world where what's going on, and you look at Britain and from a different perspective, that our democracy. I mean, there are more people. There is a malaise at the heart of liberal democracy, and he's a big part of that. Yeah. And the reason for that is there is not enough trust in Britain.
All right, I'm going to write down. I'm going to write down undermining liberal democracy.
That's the one.
But in a way, that's the whole list, isn't it?
I think what we have to look at it now. The Tory Party will get rid of him.
Yes, and then the real work begins.
Yeah, the party as a whole shouldn't be able to get away with it. They have to.
They knew what they were doing. They knew who they were putting in charge. Yes, I completely agree with you, and that's where my possible obsession with right-wing media kicks in again, because they will combine forces to try precisely that. Well, he's gone now, and he takes all of the stench with him, no matter that everybody contributed to putting him there, no matter that they sat on their hands while good MPs, or at least MPs who recognise the value of the institutions that Rowe describes, were slung out of the party in the most violent of fashions. The language that he refused to apologise for, having claimed that the best way to honour Joe Cox's memory was to get Brexit done. The tidal waves of verbal and physical violence, of threats and actual attacks unleashed by that rhetoric and by that attitude, all of these things. The Daily Mail front pages, which weren't his responsibility but were very much of a piece with what Rowe describes, the enemies of the people, about our actual judges, crush the saboteurs, about our actual MPs. And he rode that tiger. That is the point. He didn't create it necessarily, but he rode it because he thought that it would take him to Downing Street, and he was right. And what got broken along the way, we'll only really fully understand when he's gone and the dust has settled. Rowe, thank you, mate. You're absolutely right to stick to your guns, actually, and go with the huge brushstroke, as it were, of undermining liberal democracy, making the truth not matter. And you can file proroguing Parliament under that. You can file misleading the Queen under that. You can file being prepared. And Brandon Lewis, another one who should not be allowed to escape responsibility for not just facilitating Johnson, but for his own actions, being prepared to break the law in a limited and specific way. Kevin's in Marbella. Kevin, what have you got?
Good morning, James. How are you doing?
Very well indeed. What are you putting on the list?
Mine's a big brushstroke as well, actually.
Yes, okay.
But it's basically demeaning Great Britain as an international entity in itself, as an expat or immigrant in this country. Every time someone says, "Oh, you're British," you go, "Yeah, I know. I'm sorry." And at first it was funny. I mean, yeah, and it is. I mean, we have a habit of doing things like Boaty McBoatface and finding amusing things. I mean, Boris Johnson came from "Have I Got News for You?" and we all thought it was really funny, except from an international point of view.
Guilty, for the record. I was guilty of that. Guilty of that.
Oh, yeah, loads of people were. I thought he was really funny. I wouldn't vote for him, but that's your problem. But I just can't understand how anyone can vote for him.
So you're going for the international reputation, tarnishing our international reputation, making us an international
Absolutely, and to follow on from your Russian chat,
yes.
You wonder what status he has when other international leaders look at him. Maybe he should threaten Putin with a cake. because that's about all he's got.
Very nicely done. Knitting together some of the great stories of the moment. It's coming up to past 11, so the two additions to the list there are huge overviews, aren't they? Damaging the UK's international reputation or making us a laughing stock. You only need to look at other media to recognise this. Look at how some of the stuff that's going on here is being reported in other countries. Former Australian Prime Minister just described Liz Truss as demented. I think in response to her attempt to portray her trade deals as being some sort of achievement or some sort of accomplishment. And undermining liberal democracy, which I think is actually true. You know, in fact, you've got Jacob Rees-Mogg on Newsnight last night claiming that we now have a presidential system. I know presidential systems can exist in liberal democracies, but we simply don't have a presidential system. Jacob Rees-Mogg told you it was raining, and it wasn't raining. Would you stop believing him then? I mean, at what point do these people actually lose the trust and support of the poor saps who have fallen for their shtick and voted for? I do not know. We continue to collate the Boris Johnson files, and do you know, if you'd allow me a moment, I started off having fun. I had some, I mean, it's fun in a sense, but it's quite dispiriting, actually, this. It was an attempt to sort of conduct a conversation about the continuing scandals from a slightly different angle, to take a broader view. But the longer it goes on, particularly the mentions, actually, for me, of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, Joe Cox and the Northern Irish peace process. If it is eventually a cake that does for him, that's actually a national scandal. When you look at all the other things that he's borne responsibility for over the years. The idea that he got away with all of that is actually quite draining to me. 11:36 is the time. And I don't know about you, the bulletin at 11 o'clock, when they played a clip of Liz Truss, I'm not the first one, or indeed the only one, to notice that something very, very odd has happened to Liz Truss's voice. And I pick up on it for two reasons. The first is I think it's very funny, and we could all do with a giggle. But the second is, I wonder if there's anything she's not prepared to sacrifice or completely transform in pursuit of power. And this, after all, is the woman who rightly observed that there is not one country in the world that would give us a better trade deal outside the EU that we would get as a member of the EU. And now she sort of briefs the Daily Express that she's sort of a cross between Boadicea and Margaret Thatcher. But the difference in her voice is it deceitful? Margaret Thatcher did it. Margaret Thatcher had vocal training, but the idea, again, we're back to the question I asked you yesterday about Jacob Rees-Mogg. Just how stupid does he think you are? Liz Truss thinks you're going to take her more seriously as a politician, or you're more likely to see her as a Prime Minister if she talks in a deeper voice. That at least is my theory. I shall merely, Your Honour, present the evidence, and I shall let the ladies and gentlemen of the jury reach their own conclusions.
We are selling tea to China. Yorkshire tea. Incursion is broader, so it means any Russian movement into Ukraine. It's a technical term.
They're 2 years apart, roughly, give or take. More than 2 years apart? All right, more than 2 years apart. That's pretty funny, no? Do you want to hear again? Can we split it so that I can be hilarious or do we have to play it all out in one go? I have to play it all out in one go. All right, well, you can do your own hilarious commentary in the middle of this. Here you go. What on earth has happened to Liz Truss's voice? It appears to have ended up in the same place as her principles, i.e. completely disappeared.
We are selling tea to China. Yorkshire tea. Incursion is broader, so it means any Russian movement into Ukraine. It's a technical term.
You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Oh, my God, it's happened to me as well. How did that... Whoa! It's 11:38. Back to the business in hand. Pete's in Victoria. Pete, what would you like to say? What do you want to stick on the list?
Well, I don't know how you're going to label it. Do you label it missing in action, AWOL, or dereliction of duty? I'm talking about the London riots.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about
that. I don't know if he was on one of his mates, in one of his mates...
2011 when he was Mayor of London.
Yeah, that's the thing that really rankles with me. Is it? And people elected him again.
I know. Why does that? So for people who don't know, he was on holiday and he refused to come back for quite a long time. I mean, he came back in the end. But the idea was that he didn't need to be here to deal with probably the biggest public order threat that London has seen in in a very long time. Why that one for you personally? Why did that one rankle?
Because he was the leader of London.
Yes.
And you needed someone to lead. And everyone else was kind of, just putting out sound bites, saying, oh, it'll be all right, we'll all across it. And, and then eventually I think he bowed to the pressure and someone stuck a broom in his hand and put him on the telly.
You can see.
He swept a little bit at Clapham Junction.
That's right, and he got abused, didn't he, down in Clapham Junction? I remember that.
Quite rightly so.
He was. And do you know, there's another element to that as well, in the way that when he finally did come back from his holidays, that the way that he responded to it was arguably quite authoritarian. And that perhaps set the tone for some of what has followed with the police crime sentencing and courts bill.
And for all the Cobra meetings that he missed.
Well, you're only allowed one. You've just nicked someone else's thunder there. I'm sure there's someone on the line who's going to raise the fact that he skipped 5 Cobra meetings.
I was just saying it led to that, so...
Yes, no, you could be right. Oh, so just simply being AWOL for the London, right? You're the mayor of London.
Absolutely.
You've got one job: provide a little bit of leadership when the city is imperilled. Yeah. And he stayed on his.
Still getting your suntan.
Stayed on his sun lounger. Remind you of anyone, Dominic Raab? Oh, that's a relief. That little love fest for Dominic Raab appears to be over. You'll remember that he stayed on his sun lounger during the fall of Kabul. That would be the British Foreign Secretary at the time. Thank you, Pete. Well played. It's 11:41, and Shane is in Edinburgh. Shane, what do you want to add to the list?
Good morning. Before I say what I rang to say, I have some inside information on the Nazneen Zaghari Radcliffe situation.
No, you can't do that. But not unless you've cleared it with the producer, mate. This is, obviously live national radio. So if you say something that's legally sensitive or libelous or any of the above, then it's me that gets into trouble, and none of us would want that. So you can continue if you want, or we can call it quits.
No. It's not legally sensitive.
No, I just said I can't do it live on air. Neil's in Greenwich. Neil, what would you like to put on the list?
Morning, James.
Hello,
can we play a little game? Can I be Jennifer today? And I'll pick you up as blonde-haired, blue-eyed. I'll buy you a drink, and then you can pay me £100,000 for internet training.
Technology lessons, Neil. Technology lessons.
Oh my God! My name's Jennifer Curie.
That is a remarkable, and of course, having with her in the family home. He took her home, didn't he? Because she took pictures of him cooking pasta, and I believe they did it on the sofa. Or rather, I believe you did it. You did it on the sofa.
Girlfriend.
That's not. It's just gross, actually. It is just icky, right? It's just gross.
But you know what?
Go on.
You know what? Your researcher actually made me feel much better. I made a mistake. I thought it was 150,000. So she's turned down the volcano in my stomach. She said it's 100,000. So
and this was money given, I think, in grants to her company or something of that nature. She also got put on trade trips, which many people close to the action didn't really understand her qualifications for being included on the trade trips. And of course, she hosted many visits from the then Mayor of London in her flat, which infamously contained a pole of the dancing variety, and given Boris Johnson's subsequent... remember, he lost his WhatsApp messages to the Tory donor. So, at the very least, he should be able to get a refund for those technology lessons, Neil. At the very least.
WhatsApp is getting very unreliable. It's a free service, but I hate it when you lose your messages, right?
It's absolutely awful, that. Yeah, it's never happened to anyone else. But,
surely Richie Sunak or... somebody in Parliament could have taught him how to use that for free. Maybe even Keir Starmer could have sat down and taught him.
How you do it. Otherwise, you could just forget that you'd sent a letter to somebody asking for money that paid for every single thing you see when you spend time in your own home with your eyes open, which is a fairly neat description of the role, I think, that Lord Brownlow played in Boris Johnson's domestic arrangements. The role that Jennifer Curie played in Boris Johnson's domestic arrangements, an altogether sleazier business, but one which Neil reminds us is also on the list and could quite easily have been joined by many other examples of pretty egregious moral failure. Jonathan's in Andover. Jonathan, what have you got?
Hi, James. Yeah, big fan.
Thank you.
It's a bit of a silly example and a bit trite, compared to all the other awful examples. But I was wondering about when he was playing tag rugby in Tokyo.
I quite like this one. I mean, it is trivial. Go on, you describe it. You paint the pictures.
He just broke all. It was a tag game, a tag rugby game, and he broke the rules and he ran straight into this boy in Tokyo, little boy. And he got away with it. Everyone thought it was funny. Everyone thought it was, it was good old Boris. And I think, during the mayor elections, I think probably boosted his ratings. But flouting the rules, no care for anybody else, taking the limelight, and all those sorts of things, and coming out of it stronger. And that was obviously early on in his sort of career. And then he also playing a game of football, a charity game of football. He took down a German footballer with a rugby tackle.
Yes.
So I just thought maybe just a little bit of an allegory.
No, well, great word, actually. I like it. The notion that you get an indication of what he is really like. I think it was Bill Deeds, the former editor of the Daily Telegraph, during its pomp, when it was a magnificent organ that people were proud to work for, including my late father, actually. But he sometimes said, in reference to the gossip column, or it was called a diary, the Peterborough column, he said you could find out more about someone from one really good anecdote than you could from, 5 volumes of turgid autobiography. And I think your examples fit into that category, Jonathan, actually. Yeah, I mean, how many people do you know that would reasonably batter a child while playing rugby in front of the world's media?
Yeah, it is abuse in front of the national press, and still coming out stronger for it.
Well, because that's who I am, folks, chaps. And then on a football pitch, rugby tackling, so it's all just good fun. But unfortunately, it involves rule breaking on an absolutely epic scale. It's funny and it's relatively trivial until you recognise that he took exactly the same approach that he took to the rules of football when he rugby tackled someone, to the rules of coronavirus regulations that he actually introduced. It's incredible. It's brilliant, actually, oddly, given that it is by far the least serious at face value. It's ended up being one of my favourites. Fans of my contemplation of the Daily Mail will probably quite enjoy this. Their front page today is "A nation that's lost all sense of proportion." That's their response to reports that the Prime Minister of said nation has broken the laws of said nation. But Henry Mance, who is really a force for good in this country, such a great writer, he has pointed out that the same newspaper that headline, "Is there no one left in Britain who can make a sandwich?" not long ago. Actually, the front page splash of the newspaper, "Is there no one left in Britain who can make a sandwich?" And today, in response to people being very upset that Boris Johnson broke the rules that he inflicted upon the rest of us, they've chosen to go with "a nation that's lost all sense of proportion." What was the sandwich story about? It was, of course, when lots of staff started leaving sandwich companies as a consequence, I suspect, of the Brexit vote that they encouraged you to go for. There you go. So a nation that's lost all sense of proportion, on the front page of a newspaper that once decided to splash with "Is there no one left in Britain who can make a sandwich?" Thank you to Henry Mance for finding comedy in the nastiest of circumstances. Theo's here. He has just moonwalked into... I've used moonwalked already. BMX'd. He's just BMX'd into the studio. We'll catch up with him shortly, but I may take 1 or 2 more calls on this list of Boris Johnson's misdemeanours. We'll go up to Falkirk first. Chris is there. Chris, what have you got?
Hi, James. I think the one that the first time really Boris came to my attention was in Private Eye.
Yes.
And that was Darius Guppy.
We played that out last week. I don't know if you were listening.
Yeah, and I think...
Might play that again, actually.
And I think when you listen to that recording, it almost links to the way he's been dealing with COVID, because you can hear in his voice the concern is not for the guy who's going to get beaten up. It's the guy for him. It's the concern for him.
It's all about himself. You're absolutely right. Right, you decide. Do we continue talking about this for another minute, or do we play out the whole clip and let people make up their own minds? Because I hadn't spotted that before. It's all about him, isn't it? His interest. What do you reckon?
I think maybe play out the clip and
we'll talk again.
Maybe send it over to the Labour Party for the next political broadcast.
We keep thinking it'll stick. You know, it's been in the public eye for years, this. You mentioned private eye. 53 minutes after 11. This is your current Prime Minister, the champion, the hero of the Daily Mail that thinks you should stop getting everything out of proportion with regard to his latest behaviours.
Boris, have you got this number? Look, there is a guy at the moment going through. You're brilliant. His file at home. Fantastic. But I am telling you something, Boris. This guy has got my blood up, all right? And there is nothing which I won't do to get my revenge. It's as simple as that. How badly are you going to hurt this guy? Not badly at all. I want to know. Okay, let me explain this. If this guy is serious, I'm curious. I guarantee you he will not be serious. How badly hurt? He will not have a broken limb or broken arm. He will not be put into intensive care or anything like that. He will probably get a couple of black eyes and a cracked rib or something like that. Nothing which you didn't suffer in rugby, okay? But he'll get scared, and that's what I want him to do. I want him to get scared. I want him to have no idea who's behind it, okay? Sorry, I get You will not, Boris. I swear to you. If you knew... I'm not saying I just got this bloody number for you. Okay, Derry, I said I'll do it. Don't worry. Boris, I really mean it. I love you.
That was a chap called Darius Guppy, as you heard, who ended up being jailed for staging a fake £1.8 million jewellery heist, which a journalist called Stuart Collier at the News of the World was thought to be looking into when Darius Guppy sought Boris Johnson's help in finding his address so that Guppy could arrange, well, you heard, to have him beaten up, a couple of black eyes and a broken rib. And that was back in 1990 when Boris Johnson was, wait for it, the Brussels correspondent of the Daily Telegraph. So thank you for that reminder, Chris. And I think finally today, although just thinking about all the stuff we haven't got on our list, we're up to 14 or 15, and I can think at least of half a dozen that we haven't done yet. So don't be surprised if we return to this territory again. Rob's in Richmond. Rob, what would you like to add?
So just a very quick one, James. I mean, after hearing that example, it's quite trivial, but it gave me a sort of window into the man at the time. It was just after I think it was either when he was campaigning for the leadership or after he just won the election. But he was at a hospital and a guy just started ranting at me. He was a dad of a sick patient, I think, ranting about the cuts in the NHS. And he ended up by saying, and you're just here for a press opportunity, and then it's just having huge cuts. And his first instinct, he didn't even blink, was to say, well, actually, there are no press here.
Yeah, there's no cameras here, didn't he?
You hear the shutters in the background.
That was a remarkable moment, because I'm always reminded of childhood, oddly, and knowing that a teacher can't prove that you did something, and if you can just muster up the courage to lie about it, then you won't get beaten. And yet, 90% of the time, they won't be able to prove. So you just reach for that lie if you never grow up. You reach for the lie so casually and so completely that you can occasionally find yourself in moments of absolute exposure, like the one you remember, like the one. It was incredible, that. It was pinch yourself. Am I dreaming, Terry? Well, there aren't any cameras here. Exactly. He said on camera.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
I thought it would buy him, a bit of time. But even when it was pointed out to him that he was lying, the man still didn't seem to blink.
You don't. If you that's the whole point that the rest of us will never be able to fully understand. We'll never be able to get our heads around. Is that he will lie and lie and lie and lie and not even notice that he's lying. That's a brilliant example. It was a father of as you remember, of a poorly child. Thank you, Rob. That's a great one. Good Lord, I swear to you, we could carry on. There's no press here. That was it. There's no press here, he said, while being filmed by the media. I'll go to Steve in Maidstone because he's been on hold for hours. He's probably forgotten why he rang in. Probably thinks I'm the gas board. Steve, what would you like to put on the list of Boris Johnson's misdemeanours?
Hiya, James. Before launching to that one, very quick one. I read that Jack Monroe article in The Guardian recently, and she absolutely rocks.
Yeah, they're the best. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. Proud to call her a friend, actually, as it goes.
Yeah. Yeah, James, I don't know if anyone's phoned in since, because I was working with some patients, whatever. But look, essentially, for me, the answer to the question about what Johnson's done worse than anything else, it's got to be it's got to come down to people losing their lives. I mean, nothing is going to top that. So ultimately, for me, it would be his initial response to the pandemic. There's lots and lots of different stages of that. I mean, you could take it as, look at what he did right at the very beginning, or you could look at
He skipped 5 Cobra meetings. He went into lockdown 2 weeks late. He boasted about shaking hands with infected COVID patients.
That's it, yeah. But so many different bits in there. The 2020 Christmas is on, Christmas is off. Look, it's ultimately... We're talking about people that have lost their lives and didn't need to. We're not talking about hundreds. We're not talking about thousands. We're talking about tens of thousands.
Yeah.
There can't be anything worse than that. He put business over public health policy. Simple as that.
I think you're right. And well, even if it was business, I don't even know if it was that cynical or that clear cut, that binary. I just think he thought that he could create what he wanted to be true as opposed to what was actually true. So there's a list of 44 that's gone viral, which all speak to the death toll, which currently stands at 154,356. So starting with misses the first 5 Cobra meetings, largely ignores the Cygnus pandemic study from 2016, treated the pandemic as if it was influenza, didn't ban flights from China, sent COVID positive people from hospitals into care homes, boasted about shaking hands with everyone in hospital, ignored the WHO's test recommendation.
Over 19 million passenger movements to UK airports before they were finally closed down.
Tried herd immunity as a strategy at the beginning, didn't go into lock 2 weeks late, abandoned community testing, slow to test care workers in care homes, allowed mass gatherings at Cheltenham and the Atletico Madrid match in Liverpool.
James, here's the thing, hang on, he's not the organ grinder, okay?
Is he not?
Johnson to me has never been the organ grinder, he's the monkey.
Go on.
He's lots of people's monkey.
Who's the organ grinder then?
Well, the organ grinders are people like the ERG, which...
Oh, I see what you mean. You mean he dances to the tune that they demand?
He dances to voters' tunes, he dances to the backbench tunes.
He does whatever's best for him, but what is in the very, very short term best for him is not decided by him. That's a very good point that you make. You mentioned you were with patients. Are you in the NHS?
No, not NHS. No. I would have liked to have been in the NHS, but of course Andrew Lansley sort of put paid to that just before I graduated from university. I'm a podiatrist and I'm doing home visits today.
Well, you've got the big one on the list, and it is, I mean, in many ways remarkable that we can get up to 17 or 16 on the list of Boris Johnson's offences before we get to the 154,356 dead people, of whom we'll never know how many would still be alive if he'd had a little bit more clarity and leadership at the start.
But the thing is, James, I mean, I'm dead serious about this. Yeah. If he goes to a vote of no confidence, do I have the confidence that at least half the Tory MPs won't back him? No, I don't.
And we're back to the organ grinder monkey dichotomy, aren't we, there, really? Thank you, Steve. It's incredible, it really is. I could go on with that list, Lack of PPE in care homes, lack of ventilators in hospitals, awarding PPE contracts to VIP lanes, including much that ended up being unusable, lack of coordination between England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. The Nightingale hospitals, I don't know that they are quite the disaster people portray them as. They were there if we needed them, and the fact that we turned out not to need them doesn't necessarily mean that it was a PR exercise. Of course, the question of who would have staffed them doesn't help. My attempt to diffuse that one, eat out to help out, not making use of masks mandatory, not realising that asymptomatic transmission was a factor, failing to learn from Italy at the beginning, not closing airports in time, not testing at airports, weak quarantine requirements for UK arrivals, letting Cummings get away with the Barnard Castle fiasco, the various failures of the test and trace system, including especially perhaps the app, contracting it out to other private sector companies with no prior experience in their failure to implement backward trace. I'm not going to go on because we've got a lot to get through. I'm going to squeeze in Laz in Liverpool for what will probably be the last, for today, addition to the list of Boris Johnson's transgressions. What's it going to be, Laz?
Oh, hi, James. So I guess it was extremely sober listening this morning to hear this long litany of misdemeanors.
Absolutely incredible.
And they're underpinned by sort of a plethora of character flaws, which, I think, you can chew the fat over. But, for me, I guess the worst of all is failing to acknowledge his biological children. I think, irrespective of what you do in your life, I think if you bring a life into this world, you owe at least absolute care and love and nurturing to that little life that you brought in. And, regardless of how your relationship or extramarital affairs work out, I just cannot fathom a situation in which somebody could so callously disregard their own flesh and blood. And I think that's absolutely enraging when you really think about it.
He went to court to avoid the public acknowledgement of his paternity in the case of one of the children that we don't know how many he's had outside wedlock, of course, but this is one that we do know about.
Exactly, and I think the judge at the time ruled
it's pretty
that
grim, actually, isn't it? When you just
it's astonishing.
Yeah.
It is astonishing. And look, I think, regardless of what you say about him in terms of how he conducts himself and, cheating on his, wife whilst he's got cancer is obviously, I think...
Again, I'm not 100% sure that the chronology there was ever established, but certainly the fact that she had cancer and the fact that he frequently cheated upon her is incontrovertible, indubitable. Whether the two ever quite coincided, I'm not 100% sure. I just say that in passing. But you're right, and it's quite fitting to end with a moral transgression, if you will, because he remains, of course, leader of the party that used to be dedicated to both law and order and family values. And sort of end this bit of the programme by running through my list of things that you have asked to be remembered as evidence of Boris Johnson's character and political career. It's 18 long, actually, or 17 long, because I'll tell you what I did. I wrote down one which the chap who was going to start telling us secret revelations about Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was going to say. So I think I'll leave that one on the list, actually. But I can tell you now, there are at least... right now in my inbox there's 10 more staring at me that haven't made the cut. So these are the 18 that have come up today. Bearing in mind that I began to take it up to 19 with the decision to send Jacob Rees-Mogg to Balmoral to mislead the Queen about the unlawful proroguing of Parliament. Yeah, nothing to see here. So we begin with, he invented the genre of journalism that told lies about the European Union, our membership of it, and essentially groomed and gaslit an entire nation into Brexit. Speaking of Brexit, the 350 million quid conflation with the NHS on the side of that bus, the refusal to continue to help feed the poorest children in the country during the school holidays in lockdown, and then the complete flip-flop when Marcus Rashford rightfully intervened, the consent to Dominic Cummings standing in the Rose Garden in Downing Street, or sitting in the Rose Garden in Downing Street and telling barefaced lies about his trip to Barnard Castle, the claim that the best way to honour the memory of Joe Cox, a passionate anti-Brexit campaigner assassinated by a white supremacist terrorist during the Brexit campaign, would be to, and I quote Boris Johnson, get Brexit done. The failure to review or reconsider his approach to humanity in general and coronavirus in particular after his own illness, his own very, very serious illness, the absence, the caller suggested, of redemption. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe's plight, his contribution to that was to make it worse by sticking his foot in his mouth once again, running away on the day that he could have voted against the fourth runway at Heathrow, which of course he'd promised his constituents in the constituency he represents, which would be most affected by the new runway. He just legged it and hid, jeopardising the peace process in Northern Ireland and lying about the necessity of introducing a border in the Irish Sea, the abolition of the Erasmus programme, which left our correspondent students in Rome being sent home sometimes halfway through their course because the funding had dried up, undermining the whole of liberal democracy and damaging the UK's reputation abroad. Those are two very big but nonetheless pertinent contributions to the list. Refusing to come back from his holiday when the London riots were underway. The deployment of the phrase tank-topped bum boys, displaying a sort of casual and deeply unpleasant homophobia. The affair with Jennifer Arcuri, and of course the amount of money that ended up in her business and the trips that she went on when he was mayor, but we'll just stick it to the affair for the time being. Conspiring with Darius Guppy to get a journalist beaten up, saying to the father of a poorly child that there were no press present while being filmed by the BBC in a hospital. The death toll, which stands at 154,356, and how many of those people would still be alive if he had adopted different policies or displayed more clarity and leadership at the time. And finally, going to court to seek to avoid acknowledging the existence of his own child. Ladies and gentlemen, your Prime Minister.
I've done shit everywhere that there is to eat. I guess it's time for me to get the fuck out of Dodge.